So everybody, good evening again and welcome. Dr. Jed Applerouth here to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, helping students achieve a healthy balance in their lives. I've been working with kids in this academic context for 21 years. And over the years, I've seen a lot of students whose lives were out of balance. And I've been helping them, my earliest clients were kids who weren't doing well in school. Academically, they were not thriving. And I began to help them figure out what's going on. How are you studying? Where, when, how, what are your activities? What are their competing interests? And from the very beginning, I mean, I'm hard pressed to look back over all the kids I've worked with throughout the years where we haven't had some level of paring things back. These days, I'm working with a lot more kids in college through my role as an executive functioning coach. And almost all of my EF kids, I think without exception, we look at their schedules. What do you have going on? What are your competing interests? And where can we back off a little bit? Where can we make more space? Because one of the challenges of kids in this generation, more than in our generation, I was a student some 20, 30 years ago now, they're, closer to 30. We weren't as scheduled as these kids are. And this competition to try to fill the resume, get everything done. And even in college, kids taking too many things. So almost all of my students are, they scale back. So tonight's talk, we're looking at how do you think about that? What's the right level of challenge? Because everyone needs challenge. We're going to push ourselves, and some people, kids have real ambitions for college, and they don't want to have a dainty, empty resume. Something that, because if you can't just be a purely academic kid, there has to be something else on the resume as well that you've done besides just I went to school. So there is a need for that, but part of it is how many things, how much is too much, and when there's an issue and a problem. So we'll talk about this whole concept. We'll look at reframing what it means to be doing well. And academics are just one aspect of doing well, because many of my students who are really overworked, overscheduled, there are other things they're sacrificing. And I look at the holistic, the whole student in terms of how they're doing. We'll talk about that. So again, there'll be a recording of this, and there'll be hopefully a very healthy Q&A session at the end, and we'll talk about this important topic. All right, so here we go. These days, there are many students who are living lives that are out of balance. If you're on this webinar, you probably know a young person who may be, flirting with a out of balance life, or maybe all the way in. And absent balance, things are missing. What could be a very positive time, adolescence, coming to early adulthood, can become a very stressful time. I've seen a lot of stressed out high school kids, and it makes me sad. And even stressed out college kids who are, they're missing what could be a vitally rich, meaningful experience. They're just white knuckling it, hanging on, trying to get through it. And there's a loss in that. There's a sense of even a little bit of grief, like, wow, they're not experiencing what I experienced. It wasn't that heavy when I was, in the 80s and 90s when I was working through this stuff. So the pressures that kids feel today, they're real. And parents are feeling it. And they're, it's kind of this balance of we have to do stuff and more things, more scheduling, less open time. And also the academic load is markedly higher. When I was in high school, I was very, very, on top of my class. I took, I think, 7 APs, 8 AP exams. Kids are taking now 10, at some of our top schools, 12, 13 APs, and the workload is commensurate. It's a very high workload. These guys, they're working harder. And the pressure to excel, it's starting earlier. The overscheduling is beginning at an earlier age. We're definitely seeing that. One thing I still throw into this deck, a couple of years ago, there was a great pause, and we can still think back, the memory's still fresh enough in our minds to remember that the very beginning of the pandemic, if you can think back to that point, when apart from the fear and us wiping down our groceries, it was a very different time. And I remember talking to a number of my friends who are in mental health. I have colleagues of mine who are psychiatrists, who are counselors, and they were saying among their really stressed, anxious kids, that first month or two of the pandemic, a lot of their kids who were really struggling began to do better. And suddenly it's like they were lower symptoms, they seemed to be more mentally healthy. And there's a big pause, and suddenly kids who were just barely hanging on, they began to do better as their lives, they were forced to have fewer things, fewer activities, fewer everything. And suddenly it's like some of the problems began going away. And that was, the pandemic, as it went on, it became very problematic for many, many kids. But just the early moments when it was like, wow, there's less on my plate. There's something that kids were having more time with their families, more time at home. And it was like, there are some little lessons here that I don't want to, hopefully we take that and we don't lose all of it through the mess. One of my colleagues and good friends in academia, Gary Glass, he is the head of counseling at Oglethorpe. I'm sorry, at Oxford, Emory. And he talks about the issue is not our kids taking on too much, our kids running. He says it's not the fish, the individuals. It's the whole water. It's the complex. It's the background. It's the context. But Gary's framing is that there are pressures that are systemic that are pushing kids, and so it's more the system and the expectations on all kids, not your kid is pushing too hard. It's the whole thing is a bit rigged. And so part of it is what do you do in the face of all when you really understand, is my kid thriving? I'm not sure. There's a lot of stress here, some behaviors, staying up too late, missing out. There are parents who are like, I need to hop off the train. The train is off the rails. And then there's some kids I've seen some kids take their kids into homeschooling. I've known that. Others, alternative schools where you don't have the big pressures. I've seen students downshift from very, competitive high schools to much lower competitive high schools, trying to solve this. And most parents I see, they want to still, maintain their kid in the current system, but how do we downregulate some of this intensity? The focus, today's talk, 3 parts, talking about balance, achievement, and then mental health. These are the 3 aspects of today's conversation. Every student has a balance that is unique to them. What worked for your daughter may not work for your middle and may not work for your youngest if you have 3, and what worked for you. Every kid needs something else based on their abilities, their attention level, their recovery needs. And this balance is dynamic. It's not what they needed in 9th grade, maybe very different in 10th and 11th. As the workloads are changing and they're changing, you have to really look and do an inventory. How are things going? And check in, and adapt. And once you get to college, it'd be very different as well. So be mindful of that. And we're balancing many priorities. One of the top ones that parents and students alike are both focused on is academic achievement. They want to make sure they have a certain level of academic success with grades and with rigor, pushing yourself. There's also planning ahead for the future, where I want to go. You're doing some career stuff or internships, things like that. Your time with your friends is pivotal, essential, really essential. And whenever that goes away, that was one downside of the pandemic. People couldn't see their friends in the same way, and things began to become very, very troubling for a lot of kids. They really depended upon their network to be healthy and happy. Time with family, that's something, because eventually these kids of ours who we adore are going to be off in college. And I have friends now whose kids are in high school, and we have how many vacations left? How many, they're looking at this like this time is pretty precious. Balancing physical health, that also was, the pandemic hit. And I saw students who stopped doing phys ed, stopped going to the gym, and then their grades began suffering and their mental health began suffering. So movement is essential and key. Stimulation intellectual growth apart from high school, and then fun, and just play and time to goof around and be a kid. So these are all, and to me, like, fun is serious business. Fun and play are very important, both for young children and adolescents and adults. We lose play, we lose something, and our whole lives get less rich and less meaningful. So to me, play is a very serious business. Play is very important. So one thing I learned from one of my, I was thinking, one of my therapist friends and colleagues always has people do a life wheel. I remember doing I have my life wheel, and she's like, "How are things going?" And I got to fix my intellectual. But looking at how much fun are you having? Is your life fun? Is there enough juice? Are you burnt out or having fun? Is there academically? How's that 1 to 10? And I ask students, fill it in. Are you to 1? Are you to 10? How are things going? Social. How's your social life? Do you feel fulfilled, complete, or it's pretty much non-existent? How are things within your family? Intellectually, are you learning, growing? Are you challenged? Physically, are you moving? Are you having fun? Are you shooting hoops or doing gymnastics? Whatever you're into. And then for some people, you throw in the spiritual. Not everyone does that. But are you connecting to something else? This was part of my exercise with my therapist. And part of the question is would this thing roll? How balanced, and this is a nice little exercise. You can find this online and print it out it's on Google. Just type in like a life wheel. And sometimes you see through this conversation, wow, fun's at a 2 or 3. And ultimately I ask my students, so where do you want it to be? Like, does that need to go? And not always a 10, because there are different phases in your life. Sometimes you have a lot going on, but if I can get fun up to a 5, that would be a lot better than fun at a 1 or 2 or 3. Same thing physically. Can I work back in some time going to the gym, time playing hoops, time, whatever I need, and trying to get a sense of what do you need to be balanced. And I have this conversation with kids in high school and college too. All my students, I've student in Michigan, Northeastern, Texas A&M, and like we talk about like what's missing, what can we pare down, what can we add, what's going to make your life more fulfilling, more rewarding, more meaningful, not just how are the grades. That's one little part of a talk of how are you doing holistically as a being. So achievement, we have to define achievement. We all want our kids to achieve. We all have some ambition, but part of it was what it means to achieve, and part of it, what it meant for us as adults. How we did is very different than how our kids are going to do. Like the way their genes are different than ours, and their drives, motivations are different than ours, generationally, and what it means. Like oftentimes, parents come to me, and I'm working with a student who's typically, they come to me when they're in crisis, and things are not working, not always, or they're taking their kids off their medicine, their stimulant. Can you help make sure they don't fly off the rails? But oftentimes things aren't going as well. A lot of stress, there could be failure. And what the parents want is often quite different than what the kids want. That's something I definitely do see. There's a question, will this be posted? Yes, we're going to share these slides. So that is coming. I'm sorry, we're going to share a recording of this. We stopped sharing the decks, but we'll always share the recording. You're going to fast forward the slides if you want. So everyone, we got to figure out, what does success mean to you academically? Some parents say, I want this. I ask the kid, like, what do you want? What does it, success mean to you? And for some, it's I just want to pass, or I just want to I want to get B's or whatever, or it's I want to get a 3.5, and I want to figure out what the kids want, and then which can be distinct from what the parents want. That's an important distinction. Okay, moving on. And so it's also important to define achievement and success in a broad enough way to encompass things besides your GPA. It's like, looking at how's the country doing, look at more than just the GDP in terms of how we're, look at their other metrics to look at besides one, narrow, reductive metric. And one outcome, GPA isn't enough. It's other aspects. Be careful of the black and white kind of thinking, that kind of pressure, and so forth. And so for some, I've seen kids where it was just about, they were pushing rigor. We didn't want to limit our options. We wanted to make sure we could go to any school in the country, which means a lot of rigor, a lot of APs, which means also pushing that GPA as high as we can, given all that rigor. Also, I want to have as many high impact activities as I can get. And I want to go to the top college. I'm a little bit nervous or afraid for their future. Will they do as well as we did as our family there? Let me get them to the best possible school. And then finally, once they get into the school, my work is done. I'm going to wash my hands, and not always, but okay, job well done. They're into Columbia or Brown or wherever it is. And this is, and they're not taking into account this particular student. There's this plan, this grand ambition, but part of it is, does this plan make sense for this kid and this time? And I've seen things go really awry. I've seen really bad stories out of, some of my own students, unfortunately. But just getting them into college, and then sometimes they fall off, some of them drop out, and things happen. And so this kind of treadmill is being mindful, being thoughtful of this kind of defining success in this manner is not great for everyone. It may work for you. You may have been this type A rock star, achievement focused, driven, focus, great school, and then your life worked out for you. But that may not be the path that your daughter is on, or the path your son is on. And so that's part of this balance of understanding that our kids are not ego extensions of us. Our kids they're their own beings, when they're going to have their own balance that's different than ours. One just a little example, looking at AP growth. There's been so much growth in the AP course taking. Again, when I was a 93, a senior, the kids took like 3 APs, maybe 4. So taking 5 or 6, putting the top kids in the whole school took 7 was pushing it. Now a 7 AP kid is middle of the road, middle of the pack, and the top kids are taking 12. And it's just like, I remember how much work that was, and I worked really hard in high school, and I just can't even imagine. But also, I was able to have a job. I worked at Rich's, Macy's. I had a girlfriend. I had things that sometimes kids in these days aren't having. Like, they're cutting off other things because it's just academics and activities, but the other things get shortchanged. So there is definitely a shadow side to focusing too much on performance in terms of, decreased feelings of self-worth. You're defining yourself by this one little narrow thing. You're comparing yourself to other people, how I'm doing, how they're doing. And we know there is a current epidemic taking place in America of adolescent and teen mental health. It's a real thing. Before the pandemic, it was ramping up. The pandemic just turned it, poured gas on the fire. Self-harm has always been an issue, and it's definitely in the more affluent populations, the higher SES kids. I had an old therapist friend who wrote my rec for grad school, and her student body was all from this Buckhead, this trinity of really top level private schools. And all of her kids had eating disorders. All of them, they cut, they did binge activities, drug use. And these are the wealthiest kids going to the best schools. But there was a lot of self-harm. And the numbers are like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people will attempt self-harm. Females, so like lower for guys, but doing things handling anxiety. Eating disorders is all about control. And when things get out of control, like controlling what you eat and other things, and the binging, the purging, or that's an anxiety thing, trying to control. And then also there's more of a focus on numbing out. I work so hard, I just want to get blackout drunk. I'm going to numb all this out for a little bit. And there's more of that. There's more binge kind of, substance use in college, and even, in high school, because of some of this level of stress. So that's all to say there's a lot happening. Now, and I've heard this too. I remember this. One of my, now I'm forgetting the source of this, whether it was one of my students or a student I just heard, but he said his focus was, I'm going to grind through 10th grade, grind through 11th, I'm going to grind through the 12th. And then when I get the acceptance letter, I can finally enjoy high school for a minute before going off to college. And I heard that. It's like, wow, well, that's sad. That's unfortunate that this is, I can just work, get the letter, open up my email, and like, thank God. And I can I can enjoy things for, a semester. And do we really want that for our kids? Is that, what we want for our children? And they're trying to do everything, trying to do all the things, the resume, but they're also minimizing risk. They're minimizing, they're just trying to focus on this little narrow path. And there are documentaries around this, and there are books about this. And my experience is, I know with my students, you can get to the very top, you earn your space in, and then be miserable. And this happens every year, all the time. There's data from the University National College Health Assessment, and there may be new data coming out. But looking at the number of kids who are experiencing stress as an impediment to college, and that's almost a third of kids. Anxiety, that's been creeping up. That's up a good 25% in about 6 years. Having trouble with sleeping, depression is markedly up. And yeah, my colleagues who work on the counseling side at the college level, their dance cards are full, and they're seeing kids. There's a shortage of therapists. I mean, they're overextended. And so that's part of it. You work, get into college, and then are you happy and have you arrived, or wow, the pressure, the stress continues. And so stressed high school kids become stressed college kids, not surprisingly. And so what I want to do is reframe, how we're communicating with our kids, looking more closely at development and health and well-being, and thriving. I'm thinking about growth and character and relationships, that these are essential, not just where they're getting into school, not getting too hung up on GPA and performance academically. And then again, too many kids, they have really good GPAs, but they have problems with emotions, so emotional regulation, problems with relationships, handling conflict. And Angela Duckworth, the researcher out of University of Pennsylvania, called them the fragile perfects. They got the grades, got the rigor, but man, the first real, they're not resilient kids. Things go wrong and they crumble, they collapse. They haven't, experienced other things or hardships. They just kept focusing on success and performance. So the resumes are beautiful, but they're when things really hit them, life undercuts them. They haven't built the resources. So what does health look like? And that's something I asked my kids. And when have you been engaged instead of happy? What does a healthy balance resemble for you? And I also, to me, it's important to focus on, childhood is an important time. I'm working with, right now, like 4 or 5 college kids, and some of them, like last year, when my freshman in college, he wasn't happy, and he was seeing some of his kids transfer out. They weren't happy. It's like, whoa, Charlie, we got to find a way to make you happy. I don't want you to go through college and then you finish it and get your piece of paper. And I'm like, well, that sucked. And that was my college, and I got through it. And so part of it with him, it was dropping down, lowering a class. My student this year at Michigan, I'm working with her, and she wants to be she's pre-med. and, taking chemistry in the chem lab, biology in the bio lab, and computer science, and, advanced calculus. And she had, 4 things in 2 labs. Like, what are you doing? And thankfully, during drop ad, she dropped biology and the lab. And then she added a philosophy class. And she's like, my life just got a lot better. And you could be grinding through, but I'm like, you're going to blow your freshman year and you'll end up with okay grades, but you're missing something that I think is, I don't know, sacred, but it's something that's only going to happen one time. Maybe a freshman in college once, and you're at this great school and a lot of fun and they're great football, and you're just going to be working all the time. Like that's you're sacrificing. You don't even know it, that you're giving things up in exchange for this pursuit. I'm like, drop the minor. No one cares about your minor. And if it's doing it in 4 years is great. If it means doing one summer as an academic, that's totally fine. But don't stack yourself up so high that you've crushed the joy of being a high school sophomore or junior or freshman in college and so forth. So again, this balance point, which is always part of my discussions, and looking at happiness, what makes you happy, and saying, my good friend Carrie, she's a doctor, a psychiatrist, says our goal shouldn't be happiness, and that's an unfortunate. We can't look at, did I do a good job? Are my kids happy? But her thing is, are the kids, are they living a meaningful life? And interesting, not if they're happy or not is too limited. But to me, I do think happiness is something to be pursued. Maybe we don't always get there. Even in living a full, rich life, you aren't always in happiness. But Alfred Adler, my therapeutic training at Georgia State, it's more Adlerian, looks at these 5 life tasks. And if you're in happiness, according to Adler, was contingent. And he was part of the Vienna School with Jung and Freud and all the big wigs about 100 plus years ago. We're looking at, the human's condition. And Adler said there are 5 things. If you get these right, typically you're going to be a relatively well-balanced, happy, high social interest person. Love, connections, love is a big one. Are you with your family, when they get older, with relationships, with their friendships, girlfriend, boyfriend, yourself. Are you cultivating, developing yourself, your abilities, your talents, your who you are socially? Are you engaging, connecting with others? Work. Do you have a meaningful way to use your talents and abilities? So whether that's in high school or for us as adults in our work, is it meaningful and interesting and challenging? And then Adler's 5th piece was the spirit. Are you having a connection with something that's greater than you? And which for him was, a big part of feeling connected and feeling whole and happy. So I look at this with my students and how are things going? And if things are missing, like how are things with, like, are you seeing your friends? Are some of your classes meaningful and interesting to you? Are you connecting? How's things with your family? Are you cultivating your abilities and talents? And if you're not, then yeah, I can see why maybe not fulfilled and not happy. So it's having these relatively adult conversations with a 14-year-old or 15, and they can totally hack it. They can handle it. And it's, of course, for a 14-year-old, I don't expect the same answer out of someone who's 35, the level of introspection and self-awareness, but I can still talk to, I have a freshman I'm working with now in high school, and, he's dealing with some big things. And I can talk, the way I'm talking to you. So they have that capacity. And happiness, Joe Campbell, is, famous writer, thinker, looked at the analyzing mythology, and his thing to his students, he taught college for decades, is, follow your bliss. That was his mantra. And again, you can't always in every instance follow your bliss, but looking at, going towards things that make you feel fulfilled and happy versus I'm pursuing some other God, some other thing I'm trying to achieve or accomplish, versus are you going towards happiness? And having that be center, I think, and Oprah talks about everyone, people, motivational speakers talk about following your bliss, but there is obviously some merit to it. It's a truism, but looking at trusting and let me go towards things I enjoy, things I like, and so forth. Now, there are some barriers when you get past, when imbalance becomes, you're hurting your health. Kids are overscheduled, when sleep is suffering, that's one of the big flags. And if you watch your kids and they're not sleeping, they're getting really dysregulated with their sleep, something is off kilter. There's, too much use of technology and social media, which I know everyone on this, if you have kids, many of you could say, well, of course, my kid is spending way more time on there than I would ever spend or I spend. There's fear of missing out, comparison culture. You kept comparing yourself to other kids, and then the stresses of social engagement, and the pressures. Kids want to fit in. One of my students I'm working with, his mom has reached out to me. Does he have enough friends? And he's 14. He's in high school, and ultimately, he was kicked out of some group chat with friends, and that's actually a whole different thing of being social online versus being social in the analog world with people and humans. Now he's he's not being invited to these things, he's being kicked out of certain chat groups or instant messaging things or platforms or Parlor, so it's interesting. But I do want to look and see, are these things interfering with my kids' happiness? Too much on the plate, too much technology, pressures, and so forth. So when we're working with kids, working with your children, your students, helping them set priorities. That's one of the big things of what's really important. That's an area that we as adults with our decades of experience will talk about things that are really essential right now and things that are lower level. Sometimes kids are just stacking it all in there and they're not differentiating that prioritization, especially kids who have challenges with executive functioning. Like they're not as good at prioritizing. And so my job as the EF coach is to help them figure out what really is essential right now. What can I push to later? What can I remove and reduce? Helping kids make smart choices about class and activities. And I'm still helping kids in college on that. Like, do you really need this? You're on this soccer team, but you're not playing. It's taking up all this time. And is this the best use of your time versus what are you getting from this? What are you giving up from this? Having these kind of discussions. Balancing academics and social life. Because if kids aren't seeing their friends, they're not going to be happy kids. They need their friends. Friends are important. Making sure they're doing some things that they enjoy just for them. That's a pleasure, not for a resume, but things that they enjoy doing. And also helping kids manage anxiety with mindfulness and other strategies if they're out of balance. So the prioritization piece, that's a conversation to understand what are you trying to accomplish? What are you looking for? What's important now? What's important later? What really matters to you? Like, what do you love? That's part of the Follow Your Bliss, the Campbell piece. Like what, and I really love this. And is that part of your life, part of your world, or has that been scheduled out? And looking at, can we get that back in, even in a small symbolic way, even in a small 10 minutes a day way, versus I don't have 3 hours, but forget 3 hours. Can you find this small little window for that? Helping them figure out, what success means for them, and what things can I carve out, and what can I reduce. And that, the book I read years ago, and there was a whole thing with Mary Kondo. We all did the reducing, and does this spark joy? And then otherwise you bless it and release it. And my wife and I both did some really massive reducing of our wardrobe and our stuff and our things, and even, going through a grieving thing. Like, do I need all of this person's stuff, or can I reduce and release and let go? And sometimes more is, there's what can I carve out? And so with kids, it's helping them realize, do you need these 10 activities, or these 5, or these 3? Even like, what is really meaningful to you? How makes your life richer, better, more fulfilling? What can I reduce? And also downshifting, even activities, other things. Oftentimes, with almost all my kids, less is more. So many of my students, we've downshifted to an easier class, or downshifted, we've dropped a class. We'll do it in the summer. Totally cool. And they're coming to me because they're having challenges. It's like kids who are thriving, doing phenomenal. They're coming to me because they're going through challenges. And so for all these things, finding the joy, dropping things that are just a resume filler. Because ultimately, colleges don't care all that much. They want to make sure you have 1 or 2 nice things. And once you're in college, the grand scheme is that you're interviewing. It's not going to be what clubs are you part of. That's irrelevant. And is it making your life better, more fulfilling? If not, dump it. And also the balance of overdoing rigor. Too much rigor. I've seen students get much happier when they downshift from an AP to an honors, or even an honors to a regular, and then suddenly it's like, breath of fresh air. And that isn't to say you abandon challenges, but there are times when I look at the Pareto principle of how much of your time is going to this small aspect of things, and where 1 class is taking up the same workload as 3, it's like, does this make sense right now? And is this serving you, versus you're just you keep doing it because you've been doing it before that? And often when I've seen kids downshift, life gets better when it's really causing problems. So don't be afraid. And I had one student frame it: if I drop down from honors to regulars, like my identity is tied to being the honors girl, and then I don't want to be the regulars, and so it's tied to identity. But she was getting super stressed out, having mental health problems. It ended up being a pretty rough patch for her, but it was, I don't want to downshift. I don't want to drop out of that hard math. Although I appreciate the spirit, I'm looking at the effect it was having as an adult, saying, wow, is this really serving you? But are you being rigid in your thinking that I am the honors person in every context? Or would it change your life that much if you drop down to regular in this class for this semester while there's other things going on? Is it a failure, or is that, wow, you're taking care of yourself? And helping you reframe that. One thing I tell all my students in this conversation was, when I was doing my graduate school in my counseling degree, I was running the Applerouth tutoring, and I was doing counseling, and I was also interning at Emory in the college career counseling office. And so I was doing 30 hours a week at Emory, plus my academic work, my classes, plus I have opera tutoring. I was going crazy. I was running around like a chicken. And my dad, with his gray hairs, pulled me aside and said, Jed, would it be a possibility for you to downshift from your classes, finish your Emory internship, and graduate in 3 years, not in 2 years? And I was in a rush. In your 20s, you're rushing to get to adulthood and independence and all these things. I was like, I didn't like it at first, but ultimately I decided he was right. And I decided to graduate in 3 years and 2. And then my life just got so much better. And it was someone with that wisdom saying, it's not really a race. And then I ended up taking 7 years for my PhD. So it's like, whatever. Initially, I didn't want to go into any doctoral programs because they were like 4 years. I'm like, 4 years, it's too long, or 5 years. So I spent 10 years in school. But when you're young, in your early 20s, or, you think it's a race, you don't want to fall behind. And that's one of the fallacy. That's one of the false beliefs of young people. I don't want to fall behind. And you realize eventually there is no falling behind, and there is no race. And it's you versus yourself. It's not you, they're ahead of me in XYZ relationships or having kids or making money or whatever. That kind of thinking is pretty unhealthy. We all do it to some extent, but they can become really problematic. But how am I doing vis-a-vis you versus how do I feel? How's my life going for me? And so academic rigor, yeah, if I'm the AP person always in every context, you may have more stress in life and more pain, versus if I can just be more flexible with my thinking and not identifying with this one outcome, life gets better. So being thoughtful there. And so the top schools in the country, I always talk about this, they're looking at more than just rigor and GPA. Today, I met with 10 independent ed consultants in Atlanta. We had an outdoor lunch, and we were talking about all the kids and where they're applying. And one of my colleagues, Mark Stucker, had like 20 kids who have over 1,500s on the SATs, like amazing 10 APs, everything's crushing it. And looking at where they're getting in, where they're not getting in. And part of the challenge is in this day and age, with schools being as selected as they are, and especially kids looking at the very, very top schools, you can do every single thing impeccably. Your grades, flawless, APs, almost all fives, your SAT, crushing, 35, 1550, and then still not get into the school that you really want to get into. And so they're looking at more than just you have the rigor, you have the achievement. And at some level, there's an element of randomness when there's so many great kids who've done so well and worked so hard, and they only have 2,000 spots for their 45,000 applicants. And that's a real thing. And so what I tell them is, don't be so myopic and think if I just get all this right, I'm controlling this one little thing, then the outcome will be what I want. Because there are parts of life you cannot control. And that's a lesson that your kids are going to face, that we adults face all the time. And so part of it's letting go of some of that control and going towards an element of trust, and that things are going to be okay. And I can't control everything rigidly, because still there are things that are beyond my control. And so part of it is colleges also looking for more than just grades, looking for character more. They're looking at character in essays, activities, other things. So just don't think if I just delight the committee will be so impressed with my super high GPA and academic rigor or even testing that it doesn't guarantee anything. So be thoughtful and mindful about that. Helping kids find things they love to do, to me, is very important. Helping them, because again, they're going to eventually have to find a career, and the more they practice doing things that they like to do, the more likely they are to find a career that's rewarding and satisfying, versus for the wrong reasons, or there's prestige or money or other things, versus am I going to like this? Because 5 years in and 10 years in, it's not enough just for you getting a paycheck. Now there has to be some satisfaction, some meaning. So helping kids with reflection, and again, they get better over time with that, but paying attention, like if there's something the kid really likes, if I notice there's a little glimmer of excitement, I call it that, into the field of attention. Oh, that seems like you must really like that. But there's some real joy for you. There's a spark for you there. That's interesting. So make sure you pay attention to that. When they find something that really gives them some nourishment, some food, some engagement and joy. And so helping kids balance their social lives and their academic lives. And it's one student I mentioned earlier. He's a freshman in high school, and his mom reached out to me independently of our EF coaching. Is like, I'm concerned about my son socially, and he doesn't, he's not being part of this thing. He wasn't invited to this big get together with other guys. And I was saying, like social development, it's not you're a freshman and then boom, he changed schools, new school. Not all his friends are there. And like, you don't need to be the most popular kid on the planet. You don't, so in terms of your balance socially, you only really need a few good friends, even sometimes one or two good friends. And that's going to be enough. And part of it, kids come into their own socially, and some of them blossom in 10th grade or in 11th grade, or they find a friend or two, or they get a girlfriend, or they start working and things happen, or a boyfriend. So ultimately, having it checked and saying, there's a balanced social life when they're ninth grade, and how many friends you had when you were in high school has no bearing upon how many your son's going to have, and what his needs are. And ultimately, I think I had a couple really decent friends, and I invest heavily in the friendships, but I wasn't the most popular kid by any stretch. And you don't need to have 1,000 friendships. That's part of the challenge of these phones, because you always know what everyone's doing and what they're doing with their lives in a way you didn't when we were in the 80s and 90s. But ultimately, the friendships you have, they're really pivotal, they're critical. Our friendships make us sane. They keep us healthy and happy. And as friendships start getting cut off or reduced, our mental health tends to decline. Other humans keep us balanced and healthy. So if those are getting squeezed, I have a problem with that. When kids lose their outlet socially, I saw during the pandemic, what a problem that becomes. And helping encourage our kids to maintain and nurture and feed those pivotal friendships, which hopefully will be with them for many, many years. So other pieces in terms of balance, helping kids manage anxiety. I definitely do some talking with my kids about stress reduction, learning how to do things that are good for them. And some kids need exercise, they need to go running, some need to go play basketball. One of my students at Texas A&M, his whole thing is he needs to go fishing, being outside. Like, I'm like that. I'm not fishing, but time outside helps me ground myself, helps me put things in context, and is really good for me. So if I'm not getting enough outdoor time, I'm not going to be as healthy. And so it's, learning how to take care of yourself, breathing, exercise, meditation, any kind of, self-nurturing stuff is very beneficial. Having some limits on our devices. Some kids, it's an interesting thing. The kids who have more anxiety tend to spend more time on these devices, or do the devices actually cause anxiety? And there's not clear evidence. It seems to be more complicated. It may be, there's a correlation. But some kids can regulate how often they're using their devices. Some kids not as well. And so I think you can have conversations with kids about how you feel after you spend hours and hours going through, on certain apps and so forth, having discussion. Jean Twenge has wrote a great book called The iGen. And her, and the research she was pulling was from the Michigan study of like kids' mental health. They do a research over the past 50 years. And these days, kids are doing less social interaction, less working, less being part of groups, less church interaction, reading less print media. And part of the research is things that correlate with more happiness: getting enough sleep, activities, in-person interaction with humans, print media, reading a book versus scrolling through things, going to a service or a group activity. All these things correlate with happiness. And so if kids are out of balance, how can we build more of these back in? And then, encouraging kids to balance the screens, and then richer forms of engagement. Can we push from interacting socially, playing games with your headset on with your friends, versus can you go and do that in person? Is that ever a thing? Could you do a little nudge when it's appropriate? There's definitely a place for screens, but also a place for being with people, and all the mammal things of reading the nonverbals, interacting and having conflict, not in the screen, but having conversations, seeing someone's face, learning how to navigate things as mammals. So just make sure that technology is not squeezing out exercise, it's not squeezing out sleep or schoolwork or your friendships and so forth. Strong friendships, they are essential, they're protective. I want to always focus on that, because even kids who are doing the best, my peers and colleagues who are doing really, really well, like they have a robust network of people, their relationships, they're doing the best in life, versus those who have just a lot of money or other things like that. So your friendships are tied to your satisfaction of life and your happiness. So make sure you encourage that. Self-care, exercise is good for all of us, and especially for school is minimizing that. Make sure they're doing activities outside of school. Sleep hygiene is essential, and helping kids make sure they're achieving that. Diet matters. When you're eating a bunch of stuff and processed garbage and sugars, that's going to affect your mental health and so forth. Time outside is good for all of us. There's ample research on how it affects teenagers and adults as well, in terms of the way it lowers cortisol and stress and makes us feel more healthy. And then touch. Human touch is really, really good. It increases oxytocin, which in turn suppresses cortisol levels and stress levels. So all these things help us feel more centered, more balanced, more healthy as humans. And then the last thing is make sure that intentionally you model for your kids leaving space so you aren't hyper scheduled, and for them not to be hyper scheduled. You need time to pause, time to get into your own self and hear the little small voice, which only shows up when you stop feeding information. If you're always playing a podcast, always playing something, always interacting, you don't have time to hear the small voice, which is your voice of guidance and instruction. If you just keep it go, 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 go until you fall asleep on the pillow, your inner world is not going to be as rich as if you make room for pauses and spaces. That's how we get to really know ourselves and know what we need. So model that for your kids and encourage them to also leave some space. And going for a walk with my friends, I like to go for hikes around, Stone Mountain and other places. We all always stop and this for a moment, for a time, like we just are quiet and let's look at the lake and not say a damn thing. Let's be quiet, even if we're talking the whole time about what's happening with your kids, your family, your health, XYZ. We always leave some space to not fill it in and just to be for at least a moment, which I think is a really important lesson. Here at Applerouth, the balance we look at is the science of learning, cognitive science, but also the art of human connection and relationships. That's part of the work that we do. And things that we do, we have 3 things: academic tutoring, test prep, and EF coaching. And just for a minute, if you don't mind, I have a small ask. Albert, if you could tee up there's a 30-second quiz, like this, literally 30 seconds. 1, are you a student? Are you a parent, a guardian? Are you an educator? Click that. Number 2, if you have a student or are a student, are you in college, high school, sophomore, freshman, elementary? The nice 2 questions really quick. Do you need any support with any of these things that we do? Test prep, academic tutoring, EF coaching. And then last but not least, would you want someone to reach out to you? And that's it. That's 30 seconds. All right. So that helps us, how we're doing here. Then there are 2 more things. I guess they're call to action right now. Any of you who are doing juniors, we're helping kids get ready for the PSAT this week. We're doing free sessions, free practice tests. And last but not least, I think it's through tomorrow, where if you need any help with any kind of subject matter, math, physics, calculus, for language, AP, we have giving $100 off of academic tutoring. So applerouth.com/academic. All right, now we have time for Q&A. I see there is already a question, and please type your questions. I will answer them. What do you mean by finding things that students love to do? Do you mean activities that we do outside of extracurriculars? So no, not necessarily. I mean, part of it, if what you love to do fits in the context of your school-based offerings, fabulous. But for some students, there are things outside of school that they love to do. It could be gardening. It could be, I have plenty of students, and some of my kids are Eagle Scouts. They love the challenge of that. Some kids are outdoorsy. They love, again, he's now a senior at A&M. He loves going fishing. And make sure you make time out every week. Like his homework was 1 hour a week plus. I want you fishing by a lake hanging out, looking at the water. And so that gave him, some sense of joy and balance. So whatever it is, if you love reading certain kind of books, you love certain kind of literature, like comic books or graphic novels, just make sure there's some joy left for you, some play. I like painting. I've begun, I went and bought some more journals. I'm doing doodling at night before I go to sleep. I'm just drawing my hand or drawing, the clothes on my dresser. I'm just doing some drawing because it gives me a sense of satisfaction and joy. So it's not for the resume, but it's some part of me really likes that challenge. Things that are, the experience. So it's trying to make sure there's enough joy in your life to balance things out. Because when there's no joy, you get on burnout, on brownout, you get more stressed. We need joy to help keep us going and keep us centered. All right. Are there any other questions? I always like questions because they feedback for the talk. And if there's not, it's okay as well. But I just want to make sure you answer your questions. I'll take a beat here. All right. Well, hopefully we addressed, the question of achieving balance. It's not just academics. Be more holistic. Be broader in your scope and your spectrum. You can engage kids in these conversations. They're ready when they're in high school, middle school even, and for sure in college. And talking about your own experience about balance and imbalance. You might share stories of a time in your life when you were out of balance to help give your kids context. My dad helped me with that, and that was very generous of him. And I've experienced it with my own, myself. I've been out of balance. So we all, and sharing with kids how that happened and what we were trying to accomplish and achieve, and realizing that you needed to downshift in some way, and then suddenly life got better. And then taking a breath, because the whole thing is about, life is short, and sacrificing years or semesters is like, man, do you have to, in high school or college? I don't want kids to lose these experiences and to say, I'm going to sacrifice my freshman year of college. I'm like, you don't get that back. That's a one-shot time of being a freshman in college. This should be fun for you. And I'd rather you drop bio and drop that bio lab and then do it as a sophomore, do it even a summer and get your freshman year back, versus spend your freshman year in a library or studying in your room. Like, wow, you've just lost something like precious. So helping them understand that life is precious and this time is precious, and make sure you treat it accordingly. Time is our most precious commodity, and we only have so much of it. So be thoughtful, and you're competing with no one else but yourself, and like putting happiness first, not just achievement and success, and living a balanced, healthy life, enjoying the time you have on this mortal physical plane. That's important to me. All right, y'all, have a good night. Thanks, Gene. Appreciate the feedback. And everybody have a great night. If you need any help with anything academically, otherwise, we are here, and look forward to the next webinar, guys. Have a good night.